Good morning and welcome to the Source of Truth podcast on this Wednesday edition. And we're so glad to have you with us again this morning as we are continuing our study through the book of Ecclesiastes. And so if you are following along with us, we'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Yesterday we dealt with introducing the idea of seasons and time in verse 1. Today we're going to begin the breakdown of the next 7 verses as we look through the different comparisons that Solomon puts in here. I want to start off by inviting you to our service tonight. We have an adult Bible study that takes place in our auditorium. And then we have youth group and kids club that takes place in the kids wing or youth room in the gymnasium. And so if you want to come, it is a very casual setting when it comes to dress. So I encourage you in that area. But if you're local and you don't have another church, we'd love to have you join us starting at 7 o'clock tonight. If for some reason you're unable to make it, we'll be live streaming the adult Bible study version of our service tonight as we continue in our study through the parables of Jesus. Ecclesiastes chapter number 3. We're going to look at just verse number 2. Let's go to verse 1 to give us some context and remembrance. We're used to this to know and kind of remind us of where Solomon's saying, and then we'll study verse 2 today. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. Verse 2, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted. That's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at what seems. And by the way, some of these, as this one does, definitely are going to carry, I don't want to say a dark undertone, but you understand, he kind of talks about the obvious. And one of these, talking about dying, is one of those complicated conversations. And it's a battle, it's a struggle when we talk about this, because to many of us, it's extremely surreal. We've lost loved ones. And so it's a sensitive subject, if I can say that. So let's say it says, he starts off with a time to be born and a time to die. Now, obviously, we need to understand in this passage that what he is referencing is not just death by itself. He's referencing a simple fact. We often say in life that there's only so many things that we know are guaranteed. You know, some people say death and taxes. We do know there's a time to be born and then a time to die. It's part of life. And we talked about yesterday time and seasons. That's what takes place between the time to be born and the time to die. What we do in that time is what we find to be valuable. One of the times, one of the couple episodes ago, we talked about the idea where Solomon stated that we come and go, this world stays. And he's right. This world doesn't change. You know, someone's going to take over where we live. Someone's going to take over what we do. Someone's going to occupy our space in this earth at some point. And so what we look at is this doesn't change. We do. We come for a period of time. We have X amount of time, and then we're gone. And the earth stays, and someone else is going to come in and live in our home, or someone's going to come in and do our job, all those things, as we have been replacing those who used to do what we do and now are in eternity. So when we look at this, there's a legitimate truth to the fact that we're all, there's time to be born, time to die. You know what? When I've watched my 3 children and other children who have been born, when I was able to visit them in the hospital, things like that, it's something. I remember when I held all 3 of my young babies when they were first born, and you hold it. First of all, there is an immense amount of responsibility from the parent point of a parent and as a father to realize you've got to provide for them, you've got to take care of them, you've got to train them, you've got to make sure you don't provoke them to wrath. There's so many things. The influence that God has given you as a father or us as a parent to that child is immense. And so as I held them, the absolute responsibility and overwhelming nature, obviously I'm glad that I don't have to do it alone. God is helping with that. And hopefully, and when we make mistakes, God can still work through that as well. But there's an immense responsibility, but there's also an immense possibility. All that is available for that young child, all the battles they will face, all the things they will see in their culture that we have not seen or we will not understand, the opportunities that they will be given to do something to help others and to serve the Lord, all are going to be in front of them. And we have a chance just to point them in the right direction. But then obviously there's battles that are going to come. There's struggles that are going to come. And are we training them? Are they going to look to Jesus? Are we training them? Are we giving them an example of that? But you also says a time to be born, a time to die. So the question really, we know that one day God's going to, our life is over. It's appointed a man wants to die, and then after this, the judgment. We know that. So the next question comes down is, what are we doing with the time that God has given us? And we talked about time yesterday, but what are we doing with our life? We've only got so much of it. So this, instead of looking at these 2 points, a time to be born, a time to die, as wow, he's seeing, looking at the negatives, he's really depressed. Man, well, obviously, he's seeing this from a very empty point of view. as that the world itself can offer nothing. Please remember that. He says the world itself can offer nothing. It's empty. The world claims to be able to offer so much, but in reality can offer nothing. And that's something he is teaching us, and we understand that. So he is coming from that perspective that the world seen outside of, if you're walking with God, there's great joy. If you're just trying to get from this world, it's empty. It's vanity, as he called it more than once. In the second half of the verse, he gives another perspective that's very similar. So he says in the first half, a time to be born, a time to die. He goes, in a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. Now again, he's talking a little bit. Planting gives the comparison of being born. There's a chance of new life. That plant can come and give us, it's going to obviously oxygen or fruit or whatever it is that's going to be coming off of that plant. It's coming to fulfill its purpose. But then it says there's a time to be plucked up. There's a time that's going to be taken out. Whether, that could mean it's dead, it's moving on, or it could mean it's harvested for its use. Here is the principle that I want to look at when it comes to this being planted. It's been planted for a purpose by somebody else. So it's been planted in a garden, or it's been planted in a field for a specific purpose, and it's that person who's planted it for its need, and that person, the gardener or the farmer, who's going to pull it up and use it for their purpose. Use it for food or use it for whatever purpose it's there for. Someone else has designed. That plant is just there to fulfill its purpose. Someone else has given it its purpose. And that's what we look at today. That's who we are. We have been given. That's the premise. We have been given a certain spot that God has planted us in. So we have to understand that God is the one that planted us. We can't, we can fight and we can say, I'd rather this, or I'd rather here, I'd rather be in that spot. But the fact is that God has planted us and he's given us a purpose. He's given us something that we can do, something we should be going towards. And so we've been placed here not just randomly, we've been placed here, and this is the purpose. This is where we need to go with this. So the question is, are we seeking out our purpose from God? Not just, again, not wasting our time, not just money or not just material things. Are we seeking God's purpose for our life today? And that means he's planted us where we are for now. Now, by the way, a good gardener, a good farmer can take us and move us to another location. Sometimes trees and the plants can be moved based upon the scenario. But for right now, for whatever reason, God has planted you and allowed you into the situation you're in right now. We mentioned this Sunday. It might be that God is trying to get our attention, that we need to get some things right with him and we need to stop kind of lying to ourselves. We need to move and be in obedience to God. And some of it is we need to stop and hear God's voice in the midst of this time. Lord, what are you teaching me? What am I supposed to learn from this? And that might be exactly what he's trying to teach us at that point. The key is we need to stop long enough and say, Lord, what are you teaching? Again, we went back to the seasons. The seasons, there's some great positives in those seasons. So the question is, are you taking advantage of the season? Are you learning from it? So even in the worst of situations, God is teaching you something. So I ask you the question, are you taking advantage of your current season, of your current circumstance and learning? This morning as I was praying, the Lord brought a verse through my mind, and it's one of those that when you go through battles, it's a verse that Paul stated, and it sounds great, but it's actually got some heaviness to it. It says, Paul says that I may know you and the power of his resurrection, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his suffering, being made conformable unto his death. Now, that I may know him sounds great. And the power of his resurrection, we want to have that, but the next two, that I may know him, the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his suffering. Catch that? The fellowship of his suffering, being made conformable unto his death. Those two things. It's heavy. When I was thinking about that this morning, it's truth that God's going to let us in these situations so I can get to know him more if I allow myself to, if I allow him to teach me what I need to learn in this season. Because he's the only one that's going to change the season. I can try as hard as I want, but he's the only one that's going to change that season. So I need to work hard to not be consumed, overwhelmed, anxious, and frustrated over the current season, but to thrive inside. That's the key, to thrive inside that season. A simple example of this, I've watched certain businesses over the pandemic that just failed. And by the way, I don't think all of it's their fault. The way things were forced upon them in the pandemic, for many of them, they had no choices. There's just no way they can maintain what was asked of them by government officials and things of that nature. That was kind of set against them. But every once in a while you see somebody who took advantage of the unique scenario and has grown as a result of this. Some of it would say is they thrive. Now, unfortunately, for instance, malls are struggling to thrive right now. We weren't allowed to go to them, where Amazon's going to have a benefit because it fit right in to the premise of the pandemic. So again, some scenarios, it's not necessarily the fault of someone not adapting, but yet the fact is this, in every season, if we learn to grow and adapt to where God has us, we can thrive. So I encourage you in this season to thrive. Where he has you planted right now, thrive. Become better, learn, do your best, and to let God develop you into everything He wants you to be in this season, so that, as we mentioned Sunday, when you go through that next door, you're prepared for what God has for you coming next. In every season, there's a purpose. He's got a purpose for you, and He's planted you there. And may you strive to take advantage of the time He's given you and to learn from Him and the purpose He has for you. Well, thank you for joining us again on this Wednesday morning. Again, we invite you to join us tonight, 7 o'clock. If you can make it here in person, we'd love to have you. If not, join us for the Bible study portion of our service tonight at 7 o'clock online, and we hope it'll be encouragement to you. Again, thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.